Okay, so recently I've been looking at British Israel. It's one of our teachings from the Royal Fellowship that we haven't covered super recently. And so, to be honest, I didn't really know a whole lot about it, so it's been great to look into it and to get a bit more of an understanding about it. And so today, we're going to look at British Israel, part one. There's so much information in it that it's not all going to fit into one. And I hope you're not feeling tired because this might be a little bit dense at times. So we'll see how we go. But today we're just going to set the scene for British Israel. If you don't know anything about it, this is the perfect intro, hopefully, to it. We're just going to look at the nation of Israel. We're going to look at the promise given to Abraham and to his seed. We're going to look at the nation of Israel and how they split into a north and a south kingdom. And that's going to be it for today, pretty much. So, nation of Israel, we all know, sort of began way back when Abraham was given a promise. God established a covenant, in a sense, with Abraham. And he gave him specific promises for his children and his children's children. So the first promise we're going to look at is to do with land, and we all know about the promised land. But in Genesis 17, verse 8, it says, "And I will give unto thee, and to thy seed after thee, the land wherein thou art a stranger, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God." So God gave them this promise that they were going to have this entire land. He also promised, in a sense, of the Messiah. Genesis 22, "And in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because thou hast obeyed my voice." And we know that through the Messiah that was sort of fulfilled, that anyone who asks for the Holy Spirit is able to have their sins washed away, essentially. And so all of the nations are blessed from it. We were told that he would be a father of many nations. And at the time, Abraham, or Abram as he was at the time, he didn't have children. He didn't have his own children. And he was told that they would have children and that this was part of the promise. "As for me, behold, my covenant is with thee, and thou shalt be a father of many nations." So at the time, this would have been very comforting for him because he didn't think that he would have had children. But the Lord said, "No, you'll be a father of many nations." And also in that same vein of the promise, Genesis 22, it says that in blessing I will bless thee, and multiplying I will multiply thy seed as the stars of heaven, and as the sand which is upon the seashore, and thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies. So the Lord said, look into the stars. You can see all the stars. Hopefully when they went out, it wasn't daytime and there wasn't just the sun. But he would have seen thousands of stars. And, what a comfort it would have been to him to know that his seed would continue, the Lord would bless it, and that they would become this incredible nation or multitude of nations that would exist. And so this was a promise which was given to Abraham, which is independent of the Mosaic covenant, the agreement that was given between God and the people of Israel. This was something independent of that the Lord gave to Abraham and to his line. And it seems that, it is speaking literally, that literally nations would come from his line. We see that this promise is also passed down. So Isaac is given a very similar promise by God. Genesis 26, verse 4, "And I will make thy seed to multiply as the stars of heaven, and will give unto thy seed all these countries, and in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed." So that same promise, which is split into two things, that through all the nations they'll be blessed, and that they would multiply. And we see Isaac's son, of course. Isaac had two sons, Esau and Jacob. And we know that Esau was the firstborn, but he sold his birthright to Jacob. And so Jacob was the inheritor of these promises. And again, God confirmed that with Jacob. And God said unto him, "Thy name is Jacob. Thy name shall not be called any more Jacob, but Israel shall be thy name." And he called his name Israel. And we know, of course, the land was called Israel. It was named after him. Crazy how that works. And God said unto him, "I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall be of thee, and kings shall come out of thy loins." So this interesting terminology that we're not going to get into too much today, but you can remember it for next time, whenever that is. A nation and a company of nations shall be of thee. So again, this promise was passed down to Jacob, who is now called Israel, and it belongs to him. And we know that Israel means wrestles with God. And I guess it's quite indicative of Israel as a whole throughout, the Bible, that we see that they're constantly struggling with God in a sense, turning to him and then turning away from him. And so then we've got Israel, this guy here. He has 12 sons, which I'm sure we all know. 12 sons become 12 tribes. But just before we do that, it's quite interesting to look at the conflict between the 12 sons. I know Dan looked at it this morning with Sunday school. They were doing the coat of many colors. And what we see is that within the 12 sons, there's sort of this divide almost between the sons of Rachel and the sons of Leah. And so because it seems that Israel loved Rachel more than Leah, and he was sort of tricked into marrying Leah, that he sort of treated him differently, gave him a coat of many colors, and this sort of began this feud, which ended up with Joseph and Israel in a position, being sold into slavery in the first place, but ending up in a position where he could provide for his family and allow his family to increase into this huge number. But what we see just before we go on to that is that these 12 children all were given a specific blessing, I guess. And what we see is that the promises were no longer just specifically through one person, but the promise that was given to Jacob and to Israel was split up between the different tribes. So in terms of the land, they all received an inheritance of the land. But in talking about the promise of the kingship and to do with the Messiah, that the nations would be blessed, that was given to Judah specifically. Oh no, it's not working. Are there any more slides? That's it? Yeah, sweet. Yeah, it's working now. So the promises were given to his different sons. So the first promise that we're going to look at was given to Judah. And essentially, the main promise which was given to Jacob or Israel was split mainly between Judah and Joseph. So Judah was given the promise that the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh come, which is referring to the Messiah. And unto him shall the gathering of the people be. So it was promised that Judah, or the line of Judah, would have a king, that it wouldn't depart from Judah, and that the Messiah would come from that specific tribe. And as I mentioned before, promise of the land was given to all, but the promise of the, multiplicity, it's a fancy word, of the descendants was given specifically to Joseph and to his sons. So what we see is that typically that would have gone to the firstborn son, but because of his actions, it bypassed him. So we read in 1 Chronicles 5, it says, "Now the sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, for he was the firstborn, but for as much as he defiled his father's bed, his birthright was given unto the sons of Joseph, the son of Israel." So basically, because of what he did, which is not a good thing, that passed to Joseph. And so the birthright of this huge nation and a company of nations would go to his sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, which is what we're going to look at now. Genesis 48, it says, "And now thy two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, which were born unto thee in the land of Egypt, And now thy two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, which were born unto thee in the land of Egypt, before I came unto thee in Egypt, are mine, as Reuben and Simeon, they shall be mine." So essentially what he's saying is that Joseph had two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, and what this is saying is that Jacob or Israel recognized them as their own sort of tribes. He recognized them as his own sons. And in verse 9 it says, "And Joseph said unto his father, They are my sons, whom God has given me in this place. And he said, Bring them, I pray thee, unto me, and I will bless them." So because he saw them as his sons, he said, "Bring them to me and I'll bless them." And so what we see, this is the blessing that he gave to them. And Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it upon Ephraim's head, who was the younger. Now, typically, you would do that the other way around. And his left hand upon Manasseh's head, guiding his hands wittingly, for Manasseh was the firstborn. And he blessed Joseph and said, "God, before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac did walk, the God which fed me all my life long unto this day, the angel which redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads. Let my name be named on them, and the name of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth." So there we see they were given this promise that they would grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. Sorry, I'm skipping ahead here. You guys aren't catching up. I could see Mum squinting at the back. Thanks, Mum. Wow, we are a little bit behind there, aren't we? Verse 17. And when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand upon the head of Ephraim, it displeased him, and he held up his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head into Manasseh's head. And Joseph said unto his father, "Not so, my father, for this is the firstborn. Put thy right hand upon his head." So basically, Joseph's like, what are you doing? You've got your hands the wrong way around. You know, the right hand is supposed to be the main blessing. The left hand was the lesser blessing. And usually that would go to the oldest son, the better blessing. But he had his hands swapped over. And his father refused. The right hand. Yeah. And his father refused and said, "I know it's my son." So he knew what he was doing. "He also shall become a people, and he shall become great. But truly his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his seed shall become a multitude of nations." So there's this promise that Ephraim, I might have got it the wrong way around, that Manasseh would be a nation, but Ephraim would be a multitude of nations. So this really interesting promise that was given to them. And this term multitude of nations, this word here, nations, is the Hebrew word goyim, which in Scripture isn't really used to talk about tribes, but rather it's used to talk about Gentile nations, which is quite interesting because it's talking about the children of Israel, but it uses this Gentile term. And this was sort of foreshadowing of what would happen and how that they would sort of be scattered into the Gentile nations. Spoiler alert for what's going to happen next. So this promise was also made to Joseph. So he had blessed Ephraim and Manasseh, Joseph's sons. But the promise was also made to Joseph But his bow abode in strength, and the arms of hands were strong by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob, even by the God of thy father who shall help thee, and by the Almighty who shall bless thee with the blessings of heaven above, blessings of deep that lieth under, blessings of the breast and of the womb. The blessings of thy father have prevailed above the blessings of the progenitors, unto the utmost bound of the everlasting hills. They shall be on the head of Joseph and on the crown of the head of him that was separate from his brethren. So basically, this promise was given to Joseph that would mean an increase of his line, an extension of that wealth, sort of military power, and this multiplicity. There's that fancy word again. So they were to spread out. And one more promise, which was given to Joseph, well, not to Joseph, but to Joseph's house by Moses. Again, very similar. Deuteronomy 33, it says, "His glory is like the firstling of the bullock, and his horns are like the horns of unicorns." Bible says they're real. "With them he shall push the people together to the ends of the earth, and they are the 10,000s of Ephraim, and they are the thousands of Manasseh." So there's this promise that was given to Joseph's house, Joseph's tribe, that they were to push the people together to the ends of the earth. So they were to spread out to the ends of the earth. And that's an important one to remember. So basically, after this, all the promises were dished out, and we see that Israel grew into a huge number in the land of Egypt, so much so that the Egyptians were scared of them, and they wanted to, they basically turned them into slaves because they were worried about them. And so the Exodus happened, they left and went to the promised land, and after over 40 years later, they settled in the land. And during that time, while they were walking around, they had various setups. And you can see now they've gone from just 12 sons into 12 tribes. And you can read the numbers there, how many thousands were in each. And so the Lord has definitely blessed them, and they've definitely expanded by this stage. And then when we see they are set up in the land, they each got their own area of land, their inheritance, apart from the Levites who were spread around, if you remember. We talked about that a while back. And so they each got their inheritance. And so Manasseh actually got quite a lot. They got 2 bits. So yeah, it's quite interesting to look at. And what was quite interesting is that in their tribes, they were allowed to intermarry between the tribes. But what would happen is, because the tribe owned the land, if somebody married into a family, they would have to choose, they would have to say that they wouldn't return to their father's tribe if they wanted to inherit the land. So that's how the land stayed in the families. And once they had come into the land of Israel, they stayed together. They were getting along fine for a while, at least. And then we see these divisions began to happen again. An incident happened in the tribe of Benjamin, where a Levite was traveling to a particular city, and something terrible happened to his wife. Basically, he let all of Israel know through an unconventional method, I guess. And then all of Israel gathered together and almost destroyed Benjamin, but they allowed them to continue after a while, and they were restored. So again, they're back together. And then we come to the time of the kings. And while Saul was king, that was all good. He was over all of Israel. But when David became king, Benjamin wanted to break off. And, well, they did break off for a while. And there was this division again between the tribes. And after quite a while of fighting, I believe it was, again, David unified them all. They were all back together and happy families. Except when David reigned, there was just he was putting out fires all over the place. There were people trying to split over here. There was his son trying to make his own kingdom and destroy the father. And so David's reign was all about unifying Israel, I guess, in a sense. And by the end of it, that's exactly what happened. And then we come to King Solomon, which Pastor Warren talked about recently, about a month ago. So I won't go into it too much, but we know that Solomon was good at the beginning, he was great, and then over time he was corrupted by his wives, by their desires, and began following other gods and turning away from what God wanted and what he had asked of them. And so we see that this promise came to Solomon in 1 Kings 11. It says, "And Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord, and went not fully after the Lord as did David his father. Then did Solomon build an high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, in the hill that is before Jerusalem, and for Molech, the abomination of the children of Ammon. And likewise did he for all his strange wives, which burnt incense and sacrificed unto their gods. And the Lord was angry with Solomon, because his heart was turned from the Lord God of Israel, which had appeared unto him twice, and commanded him concerning this thing, that he should not go after other gods, but he kept not that which the Lord had commanded." So the Lord had actually appeared to him a couple of times, it seems, and told him that he shouldn't go after the God, but he just kept doing it. Verse 11 says, "Wherefore the Lord said unto Solomon, For as much as this is done of thee, and thou hast not kept my covenant and my statutes which I have commanded thee, I will surely rend the kingdom from thee, and will give it to thy servant." So the Lord is saying, because of what you've done, I'm going to remove the kingdom from you. Notwithstanding in thy days, I will not do it for David thy father's sake, but I will rend it out of the hand of thy son. So he wasn't going to do it in Solomon's time, but in the time of his son. And he said, "Howbeit I will not rend away all the kingdom, but I will give one tribe to thy son for David my servant's sake, and for Jerusalem's sake which I have chosen." So Solomon already was of the tribe of Judah, but he was saying he would give you another tribe, and that tribe was Benjamin. So that was the promise that was given, that the Lord would split the kingdom essentially into two, a northern and a southern, and because of what had happened. And then we find that happened through this guy. I think it's supposed to be this guy, Jeroboam, and this is Rehoboam. So this was Solomon's son, and this is Jeroboam. So at the time that Solomon was still alive, there was this guy who popped up. The Bible describes him as a mighty man of valor, special guy. And it says Solomon, seeing the young man, that he was industrious, must have been pretty clever, he made him ruler over all the charge of the house of Joseph. And it came to pass at the time when Jeroboam went out of Jerusalem that the prophet Ahijah, the Shilonite, found him in the way, and he had clad himself with a new garment. And they two were alone in the field. And Ahijah caught the new garment that was on him and rent it in 12 pieces. Now, if you're Jeroboam and you've just got this new cloak, you're like, what is this dude doing? Does he not know who I am? And he rips into 12 pieces. And he said to Jeroboam, take thee 10 pieces, for thus saith the Lord God of Israel, behold, I will rend the kingdom out of the hand of Solomon, and will give 10 tribes to thee. So good ending for Jeroboam after his coat gets ripped up. That the Lord will give him 10 tribes. But this promise was given unto him, and somehow he leaked it to the press, and Solomon found out. And so Solomon tries to kill this dude, and so this dude flees into Egypt. And after that, we see Solomon dies, and this other guy, Rehoboam, this guy here, his son, takes power. And so Jeroboam comes back from Egypt, and he says to Rehoboam, are you going to do something about these taxes? Because your dad, he was taxing us pretty heavy. And Rehoboam gets counseled by two groups of people, the old men and the young men. The old men say, yeah, do it. Reduce the taxes because it's not good. The young men are like, nah, give us that money. And so Rehoboam decides to go with them and says, yeah, I'm actually going to increase your taxes. And so this is what happens. In 1 Kings 12, it says, so when all Israel saw that the king hearkened not unto them, the people answered the king, saying, what portion do we have in David? Neither have we inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your tents, O Israel. Now see to thine own house, David. So Israel departed into their tents. So they were like, well, if you're going to increase your taxes, we're out later. And so they decided, no, we're not having any part of this. And they decided to form their own kingdom with Jeroboam as the head. In verse 17 it says, but as for the children of Israel which dwelt in the cities of Judah, Rehoboam reigned over them. So Rehoboam got those guys. Then King Rehoboam sent to Adoram, who was over the tribute, and all Israel stoned him with stones that he died. Therefore King Rehoboam made speed to get him up to his chariot and to flee to Jerusalem. So Israel rebelled against the house of David unto this day. And it came to pass, when all Israel heard that Jeroboam was come again, that they sent and called him unto the congregation, and made him king over all Israel. There was none that followed the house of David, but the tribe of Judah only. Also the tribe of Benjamin. So what we see is that the kingdom was now split. So Rehoboam was king over all of Judah, and the land basically just became known as Judah, even though it was Judah and Benjamin. And the north kingdom was ruled by Jeroboam, and it became known as Israel, which is pretty confusing because Israel was when it was together, it was called Israel. And when it was split, now this is called Israel. So when you're reading in your word and you see it talks about Israel, it could talk about either the north kingdom or all of it, depending on where you're reading. And sometimes this is also referred to as Ephraim. And we know that Ephraim was the one who got the bigger blessing, that he would be a multitude of nations. So, that's how that split up. And then basically Jeroboam said in his heart, now shall the kingdom return to the house of David. He was worried that they would go back and ended up joining together again because that had sort of happened from time to time, that they would divide and then come together. And he said, if this people do go up to sacrifice in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem, then shall the heart of his people turn again unto their Lord, even unto Rehoboam king of Judah, and they shall kill me, and go again to Rehoboam king of Judah. So he came up with this plan, and he said, whereupon the king took counsel and made 2 calves of gold, and said unto them, it is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Behold, thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. And, that seems quite familiar. You would have thought they would have learned from that. And he put one in Bethel and the other one in Dan. So basically he's like, if these guys keep going to Jerusalem, then they're going to end up following this guy again, and I want to be king. So I'm going to set up a couple of golden calves, one in Dan, one in Bethel, and you guys can just go serve them. You don't need to go to Jerusalem. Just serve them and we'll be sweet. And it said, and this thing became a sin, for the people went to worship before the one, even unto Dan. So it worked exactly as he planned. And he made a house of high places and made priests of the lowest of the people, which were not of the sons of Levi. So what we see now is that the sons of Levi, who were ordained to be the priests, he decided, nah, we don't need those guys. They keep telling us to do this other thing. And so he says, nah, we'll make our own priests of whoever wants to be a priest. Put your hand up. And it says, and Jeroboam ordained a feast in the 8th month of the 15th day of the month, like unto the feast that is in Judah, and he offered upon the altar. So did he in Bethel, sacrificing unto the calves that he had made. And he placed in Bethel the priests of the high places which he had made. So just getting involved in more idolatry. He offered upon the altar which he had made in Bethel the 15th day of the 8th month, even the month which he had devised of his own heart, and ordained a feast unto the children of Israel. And he offered upon the altar and burnt incense. So what we see is that the northern kingdom, which is now called Israel, began to be involved in idolatry, and they had completely turned from, when David used to be king, which is pretty sad. And so what we see from now on is that Israel just gets worse and worse. The northern kingdom, they've turned away from God, and it doesn't seem like they want to go back even. And so what we see is just this line of kings, and I've just got like a short description of each of the kings for you that we see over the next just under 200 years that the Bible describes. And all of them are bad. So this guy, rebellious, bad, wicked, evil, sinful, iniquitous, extra bad. The worst to that point, disobedient, mostly rotten, not good but better, non-compliant, wayward, badly behaved, abysmal, full of vice, horrible, idolatrous, awful, appalling, and that's it. So they had a great run, essentially. And the nation of Israel just turned to custard. They were doing all of the wrong things, and there's this description of what they got up to in 2 Kings 17. It says, and they rejected his statutes and his covenant that he made with their fathers, and his testimonies which he testified against them. And they, following vanity, and became vain, and went after the heathen that were round about them, concerning whom the Lord had charged them that they should not do like them. And they left all the commandments of the Lord their God, made them molten images, even 2 calves, made a grove, worshipped all the hosts of heaven, and served Baal. And they caused their sons and their daughters to pass through fire, so sacrificing their sons and their daughters, and used divination and enchantments, and sold themselves to do evil in the sight of the Lord, to provoke him to anger. Therefore the Lord was very angry with Israel, and removed them out of his sight, and there was none left but the tribe of Judah only. And so because of their iniquity, all of the bad things they were doing, the Lord judged them, and he had warned them, and he ended up just removing them from his sight. And what happened is, is that the right one? I think so. I'm missing a slide there. Oh well. Is that I'm missing a few slides. Maybe cool. Okay. So what happened is that Assyria ended up coming in and taking the people from that northern kingdom of Israel over several years. I'll show you the slide on my screen. Maybe you guys can see this. That basically it just shows the movement of Israel. Yeah, you squint if you guys are down the back. Over several years. So basically it started in 730 BC that the Assyrian kings came in and ended up deporting these guys first over to here. About 724 BC, another couple of kings came in, it took another lot, and then we see in 716 BC, there was a final deportation by another king, King Sargon. So basically, because of their iniquity, Assyria came in and removed them all. And this was about 100 years before Babylon came, maybe a little bit more, over 100 years before Babylon came and took the southern kingdom away, took Judah away because of what they were doing. And this was actually a sign to Judah to stop doing what you're doing because they were getting involved in bad things as well. But they didn't listen to that sign. I'll read a scripture to you because I don't have it up here. 1 Chronicles 5 verse 26, it says, "So God, the God of Israel, stirred up the spirit of the king of Assyria, the spirit of Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, and he took them into exile, namely the Reubenites, the Gadites, half tribe of Manasseh, and brought them to Halah and the river of Gozan to this day." So they were taken. And what we see is that Assyria then repopulated that area, which was the northern kingdom of Israel, with people from the other lands that they had captured. So they replaced them with people from Babylon, Cutha, Hamath at the time, all of these places, put them in the cities round about. And what's really interesting is that we know that Babylon, skipping forward now, Babylon later, when they had taken all of the Jews from Judah, that there was an edict issued that they would return back to their homes, and they were allowed to do that. But that didn't happen with Israel, the northern kingdom. That never happened, and so their land was already full of these other nations. And so the 10 tribes disappeared. Where did they go? That's the question. Are they still around? Some people don't think so. Some people think that they just were wiped out. Some people think that they've just disappeared into society somewhere. Some people think they're part of Japan. Some people think they're part of Iraq. So where are they? But there's a few promises which were given that indicate that Israel is still out there. In Ezekiel 37, it says, "And say unto them, Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I will take the children of Israel from among the heathen, whither they be gone, and will gather them on every side and bring them into their own land." So this is saying that they are among the heathen, they're among the Gentiles, and the promise was that the Lord will gather them on every side and bring them back into their land. Verse 22, it says, "And I will make them one nation in the land, and upon the mountains of Israel, and one king shall be king to them all. And they shall be no more two nations, neither shall they be divided into two kingdoms any more at all." So this promise was given that in the latter days, they would come out of those nations, out of the Gentile nations, be restored to the land, and the two kingdoms would be whole again. And so Josephus wrote at the time, he said, "While the 10 tribes are beyond the Euphrates now, and are an immense multitude, and are not to be estimated by numbers." So at the time, around the time of Jesus, there was this historian who was writing and believed that they were still in existence, but he didn't know where they were. He knew that they were past the river Euphrates. He knew they would have been huge in number by this stage. And so the question is, where are they? And that's it for today. Find out next time. So yeah, hopefully that was interesting.